They would remember her first by the stillness of her face, for stillness was often mistaken for pride, and pride for safety. In the glittering assembly rooms off Hanover Square, where chandeliers flamed like captive suns and music stitched strangers into temporary harmony, she stood as one stands upon a narrow shore, aware that a single misstep might send her into waters too deep to name. Miss Eliza Harrow had learned early that a woman of modest fortune must master the art of appearing untroubled, even while every glance weighed, every whisper tallied her worth in invisible coin. The evening's musicale had drawn London's sharpest eyes. Silk rustled, fans fluttered, and voices dipped into conspiratorial murmurs that clung to the walls like perfume. Eliza felt them long before she heard them. The questions posed without kindness, the arithmetic of marriage conducted upon her person. Her family was respectable, her education thorough, her dowry regrettably thin. These facts traveled faster than her name. She smiled when spoken to, answered with measured wit, and retreated when the conversation curved toward pity. Dignity, she had learned, was a shield that bruised the arm holding it. Across the room, surrounded by laughter as by a natural element, stood Adrian Montfort, Duke of Ravensmere. He wore ease the way other men wore tailoring, as if comfort were stitched into his bones. His fortune was unassailable, his lineage ancient, his prospects limitless. Society forgave him everything because it needed him to exist as proof that the system worked. Unattached by preference and famous for it, he moved through ballrooms with a genial detachment that charmed and wounded in equal measure. Women admired him, mothers calculated him, men excused him. Consequence had never yet found him worth its time. Eliza noticed him not because he was handsome, though he was, but because his laughter rose above the room, careless and unguarded. It struck her as the laughter of someone who had never been forced to measure his words. She had no intention of engaging him, for intention itself could be dangerous. Yet fate, which delights in economies of cruelty, placed her within the orbit of his notice when a mutual acquaintance drew them together with a careless introduction and a remark meant only to amuse. Their exchange began lightly, a few sentences traded as one might trade pleasantries for warmth. Eliza spoke with restraint, her eyes bright but steady. Adrian, amused by her composure and emboldened by the expectant crowd that lingered nearby, leaned closer and allowed levity to tip into recklessness. He teased her bold gaze, remarked upon her seriousness, and, smiling as if at his own cleverness, said that if she continued to look at him so earnestly, he might yet be compelled to marry her. Laughter fluttered nearby, eager and unthinking. The words, once spoken, could not be recalled. Eliza did not laugh. She did not blush. She did not retreat. Instead, she inclined her head with a grace that stilled the air and replied, clearly enough for those nearest to hear, that she had long wondered when he would ask. Her voice did not tremble. It did not rise. It settled into the room like a stone dropped into water, and the ripples reached every ear. Silence followed, profound and unmistakable. Music faltered, conversation snagged, and eyes turned with the hunger of witnesses who understood they had just been handed a story. In that moment, Eliza felt the full weight of what she had done, and yet she did not regret it. To retreat would have been to confess shame she did not deserve. If ruin were to come, she would meet it standing. Adrian's smile froze, then vanished. He saw, as if for the first time, the faces around him not as scenery but as judges. A jest, harmless in his mind, had become a declaration under the unforgiving law of public speech. He attempted a laugh, then thought better of it. His pride bristled, his irritation sparked, and beneath both stirred an unfamiliar unease. He had not meant to ensnare himself, and yet the trap was unmistakable. Whispers ignited before the orchestra recovered its tempo. Names paired themselves together with alarming speed. Some pitied her. Others suspected her. Few blamed him aloud, though many watched him closely now, curious to see whether the great Duke would honor a moment he wished undone. Eliza felt the scrutiny settle upon her shoulders like a mantle too heavy to refuse. Her reputation, so carefully preserved, balanced on the interpretation of a sentence. When Adrian bowed and withdrew, promising nothing yet denying nothing, the damage was complete. Eliza remained where she was, composed and alone, aware that her future had narrowed to a single corridor. She told herself that she had chosen this path, and perhaps she had. Yet choice did not lessen the cost. As the evening staggered onward, she endured sympathetic smiles and sharpened looks with equal resolve, knowing that survival in such rooms depended upon endurance more than hope. By morning, the city would hum with speculation. By afternoon, calls would be expected. And by evening, the Duke would learn what England demanded of men who spoke carelessly before witnesses. For in a society governed by appearances, intent mattered less than outcome, and honor was a debt that must be paid in full. As Eliza finally stepped into the cool night air, she did not know whether she had secured her salvation or signed her ruin, only that her name now rested irrevocably upon his. Behind curtained windows, she allowed herself a single unguarded breath, then squared her shoulders once more. Whatever came next would be endured with the same quiet courage that had carried her thus far. Somewhere across the darkened streets, a duke reckoned with consequences for the first time, and two lives, bound by a sentence spoken in jest, moved unwillingly toward collision. London waited, listening, as if the stones themselves anticipated scandal, duty, and a love neither yet understood entirely. At precisely 11 the following morning, the Harrow household received a card edged in sober black, delivered with ceremonial care. Eliza watched from the sitting-room as the maid accepted it, noting the pause, the slight widening of eyes, the respect that entered the woman's posture. The name upon the card altered the air itself. Consequence, it seemed, had learned the address. Adrian Montfort arrived as custom required, immaculate and controlled, though control did not come easily to him that day. The memory of the musicale clung like smoke. He had slept poorly, haunted less by gossip than by the calm assurance with which Eliza had answered him. She received him with perfect courtesy, neither triumphant nor abashed, and this unsettled him more than reproach would have done. Obligation had brought him to her door. Curiosity kept him there longer than propriety demanded. Their conversation unfolded within the narrow rails of formality. He spoke of weather and music, of shared acquaintances, of nothing that mattered. She responded with precision, offering neither warmth nor coldness, only attentiveness. He realized, with irritation he dared not show, that she would not ease his discomfort by pleading for reassurance. If there was to be rescue, he would have to provide it himself. Society did not wait for him to decide. Within days, the pairing was everywhere acknowledged, if not yet confirmed. Invitations arrived addressed to them both. Glances followed them through drawing-rooms and gardens. Eliza bore the scrutiny with a dignity sharpened by necessity, while Adrian began to understand the weight she had carried long before he had spoken his foolish words. Each appearance bound them more tightly, threads of assumption weaving a net no explanation could unravel. He sent flowers first, then thought better of their extravagance and replaced them with books, chosen carefully and delivered without flourish. Eliza recognized the gesture for what it was, an attempt at sincerity untainted by spectacle. She thanked him with genuine warmth, and the smile she allowed herself in that moment lingered in his thoughts far longer than it should have done. He began to notice her silences, the way she listened as though words were precious currency, and this attentiveness stirred something restless within him. Yet with every kindness came suspicion. Whispers followed Eliza more closely now, questioning her motives, tallying her supposed triumph. Adrian heard these murmurs and felt an unexpected anger on her behalf. He answered them obliquely, defending her without naming her, allowing others to infer his meaning. Such defenses cost him little, yet they altered how he was seen. For the first time, society watched him not merely as a spectacle, but as a man bound by his choices. The strain between duty and inclination sharpened when an afternoon excursion ended in misfortune. A sudden storm turned roads treacherous, and the carriage bearing them was forced to halt. Protocol dictated restraint, yet circumstance ignored etiquette. Sheltered together, rain drumming its insistence upon the roof, they shared a silence charged with awareness. Nothing improper passed between them, yet the closeness itself felt dangerous, as though the air had learned to hold its breath. When at last they returned, rumor outpaced explanation. Adrian was summoned by advisers who spoke in careful tones of prudence and resolution. Eliza, meanwhile, received visits heavy with implication, her every word weighed for advantage. That evening, Adrian came again, this time without pretense. In the quiet glow of the hearth, he confessed his misjudgment, his discomfort with obligation, and, most haltingly, his growing respect for her strength. Eliza listened, hands folded, eyes steady. She did not absolve him, nor did she accuse. Instead, she spoke of endurance, of how a woman learned to stand still beneath judgment lest movement be mistaken for guilt. Her words were neither bitter nor pleading. They were simply true. Adrian felt them settle within him, reshaping something long unexamined. When he departed, the night seemed altered, as though possibility had been admitted without consent. Eliza closed the door and leaned briefly against it, allowing herself the smallest tremor of hope. Across the city, Adrian confronted a truth he had avoided. The trap he feared was no longer forged by society alone, but by feeling he had not chosen and could no longer deny. In the days that followed, their encounters grew more frequent, bound by expectation yet shaped by restraint. Adrian found himself anticipating her voice, the particular cadence of her reasoning, the way she could disagree without offense. Eliza, in turn, observed the gradual shedding of his flippancy, noting how responsibility sat upon him with increasing familiarity. Each meeting ended with matters unresolved, yet each carried them further from indifference. Gossip sharpened as anticipation did. Some declared the match inevitable, others predicted humiliation. Eliza moved through these forecasts with practiced composure, though alone she acknowledged the peril of hoping. Adrian began to sense that withdrawal now would not only damage her standing, but fracture something within himself that had only just awakened. The knowledge frightened him more than scandal ever could. One evening, as they parted beneath a sky bruised with twilight, Adrian hesitated, then bowed with a gravity that startled them both. Eliza returned the gesture, her expression unreadable, and watched him depart with a heart balanced between resolve and uncertainty. Neither spoke the words that pressed upon them, yet both understood that silence, too, could bind. The season advanced, the city watched, and what had begun as obligation edged ever closer to something neither yet dared to name aloud. As candles were lit across London, Eliza stood at her window, aware that patience was becoming a choice rather than a necessity. Adrian, elsewhere, confronted the unfamiliar ache of anticipation. Between them stretched expectation, fragile yet insistent, promising revelation or ruin. Society leaned forward, eager for resolution, while beneath its gaze two hearts moved cautiously toward a truth still unspoken, and therefore still dangerous. The next step would demand courage neither had yet fully claimed. But time pressed relentlessly onward. The crisis arrived without ceremony, as such things often do, borne not by thunder but by paper and polite phrasing. A letter reached Eliza one morning, written in a hand too careful to be kind, advising her that continued ambiguity endangered not only her own standing but that of her family. It urged resolution, swift and proper, before conjecture hardened into verdict. She folded the letter calmly, though her pulse betrayed her, and placed it beside the others she had not answered. The world was closing its circle, and patience, once a shield, had become a liability. Adrian received his summons that same day, delivered by an uncle whose affection was tempered by pragmatism. He was reminded of precedent, of expectation, of how leniency toward women did not extend to men who hesitated. The tone was civil, yet unmistakable. Decide, or be decided for. Adrian listened, hands clasped, aware that his former freedom had dissolved quietly, replaced by a responsibility he could no longer postpone. When he left, he did not feel cornered so much as clarified. He went to Eliza that afternoon without announcement, compelled by urgency rather than protocol. She received him in the small garden behind the house, where autumn had begun its careful rearrangement of color. They stood among fallen leaves, the air sharp and honest, and for a moment neither spoke. He saw the strain she bore with such elegance, and understood that delay now would be cruelty disguised as caution. "I have been a coward," he said at last, voice steady despite the admission. "Not in word, perhaps, but in resolve. Eliza met his gaze, and in her eyes he saw neither reproach nor triumph, only readiness. He spoke then of fear, not of scandal, but of choosing wrongly and discovering himself unequal to the choice. He confessed that what he felt for her had grown beyond obligation into something that demanded courage. Eliza listened, as she always did, without interruption. When she answered, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to reckoning costs. She told him she would not be rescued by affection that faltered under scrutiny. She spoke of dignity, of how easily it was traded by those who had never lacked it. She told him she would accept nothing less than constancy freely given. Her words did not waver, and in that steadiness Adrian recognized love's truest challenge. They parted then, not in anger, but in solemn understanding. That night, London hummed with expectation. The next evening brought an assembly more splendid than the last, crowded with those eager to witness resolution. Eliza entered with measured composure, aware of every glance, yet anchored by her own resolve. Adrian arrived shortly after, no longer seeking refuge in ease. When he crossed the room toward her, the movement felt ceremonial, as though the past weeks had been rehearsal for this precise moment. He addressed her publicly, his voice clear, his manner stripped of jest. He spoke of honor reclaimed through choice, of affection discovered where he had not thought to look, and of intention unmarred by pressure. He asked her to marry him, not as spectacle, but as pledge. Silence followed, different now, expectant rather than condemning. Eliza allowed it to linger, then answered him with the same composure that had begun their story. She accepted, not because she had been cornered, but because she believed him. Relief moved through the room like a released breath. Approval followed, cautious at first, then assured. The match, once suspect, now satisfied society's appetite for narrative justice. Yet the true reckoning unfolded later, away from witnesses. In the quiet of the carriage that bore them homeward, Adrian reached for Eliza's hand and held it with reverence rather than possession. She returned the gesture, aware that trust was a practice, not a promise. In the days that followed, arrangements proceeded with efficiency that bordered on reverence. Eliza navigated them with newfound assurance, her choices respected rather than questioned. Adrian, in turn, learned the discipline of attention, discovering that devotion was composed of listening as much as declaration. Together, they established a rhythm shaped by mutual regard, each adjustment strengthening what had been forged under scrutiny. Their marriage, solemn and restrained, was marked less by spectacle than by sincerity. As they departed the city for the countryside, the noise of London receded, replaced by open skies and unmeasured horizons. Eliza stood beside Adrian, watching fields unspool, and felt the strange peace of arrival. She had not been saved. She had been chosen, and in that distinction lay her triumph. Adrian, observing her quiet wonder, understood at last the weight of words and the grace of restraint. Love, he learned, was not the absence of consequence but its willing embrace. As the carriage moved onward, carrying them toward a future shaped by deliberate affection, the past settled into memory, instructive rather than binding. The world that had watched so avidly would soon turn its gaze elsewhere. What endured was the knowledge that from a careless sentence had grown a truth neither could have anticipated, and that dignity, once threatened, had emerged not merely intact, but transformed.